Hi, good morning. So I thought I'd run through my first lesson on the English political system, or the political system that we have here in the UK, and just a run through of the basics. If you could let me know, firstly, how much you know, and if at any point you have any questions, please just raise your hand and ask away. Um, I, of course, I'm going to assume you've got a little bit of prior knowledge and understand some of the terms, but of course, I'll try and explain everything as I go along. Um, Great, so we'll begin. So we're going to start with what is one of the essential things of the UK political system. This is what's known as the separation of powers, as you can see here in the middle. I think I can get my great, yeah, as you can see here, this one here, the separation of powers. This, if you could tell me what it is, there might be a few hints on the screen. Exactly, yeah. So this is essentially the separation between the three things that we have here: the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. These are the three branches of government that we have here in the UK, and together they make up our political system. Now, we've got some questions we're going to run through, and as I say, if you ever have any more questions, you want me to explain anything or anything else, please let me know. So these three branches together, separated, they're meant to be separated, and together they're meant to keep the other ones in check so that we have a fair democracy, which is of course the system that we have in place in the UK. So what are they? Well, what do you think they are? So the legislative, what comes to mind when you think of the legislative? Similarly, yeah. So that would probably be Parliament, would be the thing, where we make the laws. That's the legislative. The executive, any ideas there? Hopefully the shapes give you a bit of a clue. Yeah, so the executive is of course the Prime Minister as well as his crew, which is known as the cabinet, which are the ministers. So you have a minister for health, a minister for education, all of these ones. Similarly, if you know something called the civil service, colloquially known as Whitehall, that also makes up the executive because that is the executive branch. That's how they enact their reform. Yes, and the judiciary hopefully rings a bell. That is the judges and therefore the legal system and the court system that we have. Now, I've chosen that shape because while a triangle might be more apt, I didn't think a triangle next to a triangle would look good, but essentially you have the highest court in the land called the Supreme Court. And then below it, you have certain other courts right down to the Magistrates Court, which is the lower one. So it's a bit of a triangle. So those are the three branches, and that's what they are. So when I talk about them, that's kind of all they are and what's included within each. So the legislative, who do you know the names of the people who sit in the who make our laws? Yeah, so your own MP, that members of parliament, they make up the legislative. Equally, the reason why there are two arrows there to either side is because the legislative is actually made up of two different branches. You have the House of Commons on one side, and you have the House of Lords on the other side. The House of Commons is the one that the MPs go and sit in, and they're all elected. And the House of Lords is a second house where the laws which are passed in the House of Commons have to flow through. They are non-elected, essentially experts, so their power is less than the Commons, but they're still there just to keep a check on it. And as we run through the executive, obviously have the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. And where are they based? This is interesting. So actually, just to move back to question 2 really quickly, who is included in each? The reason why there are arrows there, can you see on the right and on the left of the triangle, is because in many ways those overlap. So in the past, the arrow on the right of the screen between the legislative and the judiciary, we used to have a thing called law lords. So rather than the Supreme Court being a separate building with separate judges, they were actually lords. They actually sat on the House of Lords, and they were also part of the judiciary. So that those two branches were tied. Luckily, that's no longer the case, as we're about to come into question 3. But it's important to understand, just so you know, how the UK system has developed. Now, on the left-hand side, between the legislative and the executive, the reason why there's a bit of crossover there is because, can you tell me why, do you think? Yeah, so everyone who's who's either the Prime Minister or pretty much everyone who's on the cabinet, they're also an MP. So they also sit in the Commons, they also vote on the laws, and at the same time, they make up the executive. Boris Johnson, for example, is a member of Parliament for Uxbridge. At the same time, he's the Prime Minister, so he's a member of both. So there's a bit of an overlap. So it's an imperfect system. Now, to question 3, where are they based? I imagine you know the building where the legislative is based. So where do you know where the House of Commons are? It's that big building right on the river, opposite the London Eye. Lovely place. And where's the executive? Again, a very famous door, probably, that you'd recognise. Yeah. So number 10. And the judiciary, you probably would less know where the Supreme Court is, but you might. It's essentially on Parliament Square, so in front of the Houses of Parliament. There's a big square, big Queen Square, and on one side, if you're looking away for the House of Parliament, behind you on the left is the Supreme Court, and then of course there are other courts all around the country, but that's where the Supreme Court. So they're separated now, whereas before they were a bit more conjoined. Now, coming into a bit of the high level stuff is why are they separated, which is question 4. Could you tell me why you think it's a good thing that in theory they should all be separate branches? Yeah, so it's just a system of checks essentially to keep each branch from abusing its powers. Really, they each keep a check on each other, and really the power within our democracy should always lie with the people, and that's why the legislative and the executive have the most say. As it were, judiciary don't technically make up laws in the purest sense, but they do keep a check. And do you think it's a good idea? What are any issues you can see? Certainly, one thing we've had recently is people overruling the other, or more that they clash. Like there's what's known as gridlock, or essentially a traffic jam of laws where people won't pass things or can't pass things in keeping checks, and that's always tricky. And then I put finally in the bottom right corner the thought bubble with the American system, just as a comparison. Do you know anything about the American system? Okay, well, the American system is similar to ours in the sense that they have a legislative, they have the Senate and the House of Representatives, they usually have a Supreme Court, and of course they have the executive. However, in the American system, actually the legislative and the executive are completely separate. Whereas here, you don't vote for Boris Johnson on his own, or you don't vote. What you do is you vote for your MP, and they happen to be a member of a party, and the leader of that party is then the executive. Whereas in America, of course, you vote for your House of Representatives, you vote for your senator, and you also vote, so that's your legislative, and then you also vote separately for whoever you want to lead the country, be it the next election, Donald Trump or Joe Biden. So the legislative and executive are much more separate in that sense, and because of that, there's much more of what we were looking at before with gridlock. So they clash much more. Whereas in England, because the executive is kind of intertwined with the legislative, whoever's leading the House, whoever's leading the House of Commons, whoever has the majority is going to have the Prime Minister. Whereas in America, it could be that Donald Trump is on the Republican side, and yet the majority in the House of Representatives is actually on the Democrats. So much harder to get bills passed. Great. Well, do you have any questions? Lovely. Well, hope you enjoyed it. Email me any questions you have and let me know what you thought. Thank you so much.